What if I told you a single day in ancient Rome could leave you more shocked than a whole season of your favorite drama? Picture this. You walk into a huge public bath the size of a small town. Steam everywhere, people chatting, laughing, relaxing together, like it's the most normal thing in the world. A few streets over, there's a festival for the goddess of love flowers music and traditions you've never seen before. You turn a corner, and there are busy taverns, market stalls, and places where entertainment is, let's just say, not for kids. In Pompeii, the walls are covered in art so bold it was hidden away for centuries. Before we go any further, comment the exact time you're watching this. I love seeing where my history friends are tuning in from. And if you want more wild stories from the past, you can always hit subscribe. You push open the colossal bronze doors, and a wave of moist heat curls around you thick as a blanket. The air is heavy with the mingled scent of warm mineral water, olive oil, and too many perfumes colliding in the steam. Somewhere to your left, a splash echoes, followed by laughter, low, lazy, and unashamed. You've just stepped into one of Rome's most outrageous public pleasures, the giant mixed-gender bathhouse. 124,000 square meters of marble mosaics in unapologetic human display. The floor beneath you is warm, heated by a network of Hippocaust pipes carrying hot air under the stone. You can feel the hum of the system through your sandals, as if the building itself is alive. Around you, bodies move with no pretense of hiding, men and women together, completely bare, gleaming with oil, unconcerned about the eyes that linger. You're not sure if you've wandered into a place of hygiene, a social club, or an ongoing performance. Truthfully, it's all three at once. Everywhere you look, the scale feels impossible. Vast pools shimmer under shafts of sunlight pouring through open oculi in the vaulted ceiling. Some pools are warm, others frigid, meant to jolt the body awake. The temperature doesn't matter. The real attraction is the company. Strangers drift close under the waterline, brushing against each other with the kind of casual familiarity that suggests boundaries have been permanently dissolved. No one flinches. No one apologizes. On one side, rows of reclining couches are draped with linen, where bathers lounge between dips, sipping wine and gossiping as if this were an extension of their living rooms. You catch fragments of conversation, one man complaining about grain prices, another bragging about a new slave, a pair of women exchanging knowing smirks as they watch a group of young athletes towel off nearby. Here, politics and seduction mix so easily that a marriage proposal or a business deal might be sealed with the same handshake that just moments ago trailed across someone's bare shoulder. It's not just locals who come here. Traders from the East, ambassadors from Africa, soldiers on leave from the frontiers. The bathhouse is Rome's melting pot in more ways than one. Languages weave together like the patterns in the floor mosaics, and each visitor seems to bring their own unspoken rules for what's acceptable. The result, a communal rhythm that constantly skirts the edge of decorum, that somehow never tips into outright chaos. In a corner alcove, an attendant massages a matron's back with scented oil, the golden liquid catching the light before it disappears into her skin. She doesn't so much as glance at the group of men sitting a few steps away, watching with the lazy detachment of cats in the sun. Across the room, a youth with an athlete's build steps from the water, his skin steaming. He meets someone's eyes just for a moment, and that's all the invitation either of them needs to drift toward the shadowed stairs leading to the smaller private pools. If you expected the architecture to be purely functional, you'd be wrong. This place is a masterpiece of indulgence. Marble pillars polished so smooth they reflect distorted shapes of passing bodies. Murals of mythological lovers. Venus rising from the seafoam Hercules in a too-friendly wrestling match with another man remind you that even the gods here aren't prudish. Every decorative choice seems designed to blur the line between art and appetite. The attendants themselves are part of the spectacle. Young, fit, and chosen as much for their looks as their skill, they move through the steam with practiced ease, carrying trays of fruit or pitchers of water. Some pause to chat, letting their fingers linger just a second too long when handing over a towel. You begin to realize that in a space like this, touch is the default language, and absence of touch would feel more awkward than the most intimate brush of skin. You wander deeper, past the main pools, into a hotter, darker chamber, where the air clings to your lungs. The floor sweats condensation. In the dim light, the water glows faintly blue from the way it catches the flicker of oil lamps. Couples sit shoulder to shoulder along the curved benches, talking in low voices, their knees nearly touching. No one notices you, or rather, no one minds. You're just another set of eyes in a place built to be looked at. It hits you. Then the bathhouse isn't really about getting clean. It's about being seen. About dissolving the usual walls between genders, between strangers, between what's public and what's private. Rome has perfected the art of making everyday activities into theater, and here the human body is both stage and performer. You half expect the walls themselves to lean in and listen to the tangled threads of conversation and desire drifting upward with the steam. By the time you step back toward the entrance, the cooler air feels almost alien. Outside, the city's noise rushes back, clatter of carts, cries of vendors, the faint metallic scent of the Tiber. Yet part of you stays inside, in that strange shimmering world where marble and flesh blend into one warm, breathing crowd. You suspect you'll return, not for the bathing, but for the way it strips life down to something at once startlingly simple and extravagantly staged. You drift with the crowd along a colonnaded street until the air changes. The sound is thicker here, a low hum of flutes and chatter, the scent of wine already swirling before you can even see where it's coming from. Then the marble pillars open into a great courtyard strung with garlands, and you've arrived at the Festival of Venus. It's the middle of May, and the city's pulse has quickened for this very moment. The first thing you notice isn't the music or the flowers. It's the sheer number of women courtesans from every corner of Rome and beyond, their hair, oiled and glinting in the sunlight, their breasts bare, above skirts of the thinnest gauze fabric that barely seems to remember it's supposed to conceal. They move through the crowd with the confidence of people who know they are not just allowed to be here, but celebrated for being here. You can feel eyes following them, lingering like fingertips. Somewhere in the center of the courtyard stands the object of everyone's anticipation, an enormous floral sculpture, all silk petals and embroidered leaves, shaped into a mound so large it needs its own scaffolding. It sways gently in the warm breeze, and on top of it, unmistakable even from a distance, is the special symbol of the day, carved and painted to leave no doubt about what it represents. The laughter in the air says the crowd has been looking forward to this all year. You ease closer, brushing past a group of young men in tunics loosened to the waist, their cups sloshing wine. They're making wagers on which woman will be first to bring the great bundle down. Across the way, a knot of older matrons pretend not to watch too closely, though their eyes betray a glint of the same curiosity as the rest. The festival is, after all, dedicated to Venus, goddess of love, desire, and the more spirited expressions of both. The moment arrives with a sudden cheer. Two courtesans step forward, each holding a thick rope that disappears into the garlands above. The ropes strain, the petals rustle, and the great mound shudders before tilting almost in slow motion. The carved symbol tumbles down into outstretched hands, its polished surface catching the sun like a trophy. The crowd roars, and you can't tell whether the applause is for the feat itself or for the promise of what comes next. That promise is fulfilled at the temple. The trophy is carried there in a little procession, surrounded by singing, clapping, and the steady beat of a drum. The temple steps are littered with flowers, and inside, waiting in the half-light, is its counterpart, a second sculpture equally symbolic, equally unambiguous. What follows is part ritual, part performance. The union of the two, watched in rapt silence, a symbolic blessing for fertility, love, and all the tangled pleasures that fall between. But the day is far from over. Outside, the festival opens into something closer to a carnival. Stages have been set up, where dancers whirl in skirts that lift like waves, their arms, bare anklets chiming in rhythm. The most skilled among them can make a whole crowd lean forward with a single slow turn of the hips, the gauze catching the light before sliding away. You watch one dancer pause mid-spin, looking straight into the eyes of a man in the front row, before flashing a smile that makes him drop his wine. And then there are the private arrangements, the part everyone pretends is spontaneous, but has, in reality, been building for weeks. Courtyards open behind taverns, canopies drawn across doorways, discreet nods exchanged between those who know the code. The festival, for all its public spectacle, is also a time when barriers drop and favors are given freely. For a few days, pleasure is not a transaction, but a gift, a sanctioned indulgence under the protection of the goddess herself. You linger near one of the stages as the sun starts to slide lower. The air has thickened with incense and the warm musk of bodies pressed close. Somewhere behind you, a cheer goes up. Another rope has been pulled. Another garland come down. It feels less like you're in a city and more like you're adrift inside a living, breathing offering, every laugh and glance and touch given over to the same cause. By the time dusk rolls in, the music has deepened, the wine has bitten sharper on the tongue, and you find yourself carried along in a tide of people who don't want the night to end. They won't not for a while yet. The festival spills into the dark torches, lighting the way, the temple doors left ajar, as if Venus herself might wander out into the streets to join her own party. And as you watch another dancer whirl past, hair catching in the torchlight, you think maybe she already has. The scent of roasting meat and spilled wine guides you toward the noise. Somewhere ahead, voices rise and fall in a rhythm that's not quite argument, not quite laughter, the sound of bargaining, teasing, and half-whispered promises. You turn a corner, and there it is, the street of legal brothels, not hidden behind heavy curtains or marked by discreet symbols, but open to the thoroughfare, the doors flung wide to tempt passers-by with a glimpse of what waits inside. The first doorway you pass is framed by painted panels, bright, almost cheerful scenes of couples intertwined as if announcing the services like a tavern might advertise its best wine. Inside, you glimpse a small waiting room, a bench, a bowl of olives, and a woman leaning against the wall, her robe slipping from one shoulder, in a way that seems both accidental and calculated. She catches your eye, tilts her head, and the faintest smile appears an invitation, or just a reflex. It's hard to tell. Further along, the brothels grow grander. One has a marble threshold worn smooth by decades of foot traffic. Its entrance hall glitters with brass lamps, and laughter spills down the stairs from the rooms above. Men and women drift in and out, some clasping hands, others adjusting clothing, all looking as though they've just emerged from a warm private storm. It's startling how public it all is. There's no effort to hide, because here, there's nothing to hide from. You pause at a tavern halfway down the street. The smell of spiced wine and grilled fish is thick in the air. Inside, the line between drinking hall and brothel blurs to nothing. Courtesans mingle freely among the patrons, perching on the arms of chairs, leaning over to refill cups, their laughter cutting through the smoke. Deals are struck here for company, for a night's entertainment, maybe for something longer, but always in the open, like any other transaction. The clink of coins isn't muffled. It's part of the music of the place. Even the poorer quarters have their own version of this. You wander into a narrow alley, where doorways are marked only by a swatch of colored cloth. The rooms inside are smaller, the furnishings rough, but the atmosphere is no less alive. Here, it's about quick exchanges and familiarity regulars who know exactly which curtain to push aside, exactly which voice to call for. And in this part of town, the conversations spill out into the street, punctuated by bursts of laughter or the scrape of a chair on stone. It's not just the architecture that tells you prostitution is legal here. It's the way people talk about it. You overhear two men debating whether the red-haired girl at the far end of the street is worth the extra coin. A woman in a merchant's cloak haggles openly with a young man who can't seem to decide whether to be flattered or cautious. In Rome, this isn't taboo. It's commerce with a more personal delivery. Some brothels have menus, literal painted menus on the walls, depicting positions prices, and sometimes even the names of the performers. Others rely on reputation. You pass one doorway and catch the sound of a low, haunting song drifting out, the kind that could lure a man inside without him realizing his feet had moved. Another establishment has a doorman whose only job seems to be winking at potential clients until they give in. And yet, for all the openness, there's a strange order to it. The state licenses many of these places, collecting taxes in exchange for letting them operate. Courtesans are registered. Their earnings are counted. It's not morality that controls the trade, it's bureaucracy. In some ways, that makes the atmosphere even more surreal. Here, desire has been itemized, regulated, and filed away like any other business. As night falls, the street changes character. Lanterns are lit, casting a warm, amber glow over the stones. Music begins to spill from the taverns, and the movement of bodies through the street becomes slower, more deliberate. You see people pairing off, disappearing through doorways, returning hours later with flushed faces and looser postures. The whole district hums with a sense of satisfaction, not just the customers, but the performers too, who know their craft is valued openly, not whispered about in shame. You take one last look down the street before moving on. It strikes you how utterly Roman this is to take something other cultures might hide in shadow and place it in the bright light of commerce, draped in laughter and perfumed with spiced wine. Here, in the heart of the empire, pleasure is not just accepted, it's advertised, and no one seems in a hurry to pretend otherwise. You leave the clamor of Rome's living streets, following a quieter road where the stones grow pale under your feet. The wind is drier here, carrying the smell of baked earth and the faint tang of old ash. Ahead, the low hills cradle the ruined walls of Pompeii, their edges softened by centuries, but still holding the shape of a city that hasn't truly exhaled since the day it was buried. Passing through the gate feels like stepping into a breath someone held for 2,000 years. The light here is sharp slicing between rows of houses, catching flashes of stubborn color, ochre crimson, deep sea blue, that cling to the plaster as if refusing to fade. Your sandals settle into the grooves worn by ancient cartwheels, and it's almost too easy to imagine the heat of midday, the murmur of voices, the sound of sandals scuffing along these very stones. It feels normal, lived in. And then something shifts. A pattern emerges in the walls, small deliberate paintings, flashes of bronze charms hanging from door frames, carved details so cheeky they're practically grinning at you. They are scattered like breadcrumbs, leading somewhere you haven't reached yet. If a city could blush, Pompeii, wouldn't it would open the door and dare you to look inside? You turn a corner, and there it is, a narrow doorway, with nothing remarkable to announce it. Yet something about the air makes you linger. Inside, the space is compact stone beds built into the walls, a niche for a lamp, and above each archway, bright frescoes, showing in no uncertain terms exactly what sort of service was offered. It's not coded, it's not ashamed, it's advertising with a wink. And this is just one of at least 7 brothels in a city of only 20,000 souls, not counting the taverns that wore 2 faces, one for food and drink, one for whatever the night invited. Even the taverns here are bold. Imagine sitting at a counter, inlaid with mosaic, ordering a cup of strong Falernian wine, while the walls around you pulse with painted scenes that have nothing to do with food. A glance toward the back reveals oil lamps, burning low shadows, flickering over figures frozen in acts the artists clearly enjoyed recreating. Here indulgence was part of the floor plan. Private homes joined the chorus too. In some, the atrium floor greets you with a mosaic of lovers locked in a dance that isn't quite polite company. Bronze amulets dangle from lintels, their exaggerated shapes meant to guard against bad fortune, or perhaps to invite a different kind of fortune entirely. Gardens, baths, even bakeries carried this undercurrent as if the whole city had agreed that desire was simply another ingredient in daily life. And then there's the collection in Naples, the infamous secret cabinet where much of Pompeii's most daring art was hidden away for decades. There, you'd find glass oil lamps shaped into jokes that don't require translation statues, with proportions so impossible they become declarations, and frescoes still glowing with color that can make a modern viewer shift in their seat. Once these were shown only to mature visitors, though in truth, the people of Pompeii had already made them public property centuries earlier. Walking through these streets, you realize Pompeii didn't separate the respectable from the risque. The same road could take you past a shrine, a wine shop, a baker's oven, and a brothel without ever announcing you'd crossed a moral boundary. Privacy was a courtesy, not a rule, and when the volcano came, it preserved not just the walls and streets, but this easy, unapologetic way of living. You stop in the shadow of the amphitheater, feeling the city's ghost press close. The silence isn't empty. It's humming with the life that was the laughter and the heat and the art that refused to hide itself. And as you turn back toward the gate, you understand the real shock of Pompeii. It wasn't that the Romans here were so open. It's that the eruption locked that openness in place, leaving us no choice but to look straight at it. You drift away from Pompeii's stillness and back into the living sprawl of the capital, where the streets ripple with silks, litter bearers, and voices that never seem to drop below a conversational shout. The clatter of hooves on stone follows you through shaded arcades, past perfume sellers, and jewel merchants who arrange their goods like they're arranging a seduction. Somewhere ahead, a pair of women laugh the kind of laugh that slices through a crowd because it doesn't need permission. They're dressed in fine stole fabric, draped just loosely enough to hint at the body beneath pins, catching the sunlight in deliberate flashes. Their sandals are spotless, despite the dust of the street, and they walk with a pace that says they're used to being watched. If Rome has its own royalty outside the palace walls, it's the noblewomen, and they know exactly how to make public space feel like their private stage. For them, love, or at least intimacy, is a matter of appetite, not ideology. The poets can mutter about devotion. The playwrights can dream up tales of tragic fidelity. But in these porticos and gardens, a noblewoman's gaze can slip past her husband to someone else entirely, and no one blinks unless it's in greeting. Affairs are not whispered scandals. They're part of the weather, predicted, remarked upon, and occasionally envied. You follow two such women into a colonnaded courtyard where water murmurs in a shallow pool. Around it, a gathering is formed, senators, visiting dignitaries, musicians, plucking lyres in the shade. Here conversation moves in spirals, curling from politics to philosophy to flirtation without warning. One of the women leans toward a young orator, her hand hovering just above his sleeve, and for a moment their eyes lock like conspirators. The husband, across the courtyard, is deep in talk with a general unconcerned, or perhaps simply aware of how these games are played. In Rome's upper tiers, the rules are different. Marriage is often a political contract, a pairing of estates or families, not necessarily of hearts. That leaves space, vast, unmonitored space, for other attachments to bloom. A noble woman might entertain admirers in her own villa's garden, or arrange to accidentally cross paths at the races, or invite them to a dinner where the seating just happens to place their knees a little too close under the table. The venues for these encounters are as varied as the affairs themselves. Temples, for example, aren't just for prayer. Step into a shrine to Venus, and you might find worshippers whose offerings are less about piety and more about proximity. In the baths, marble pillars provide enough shadow for a quiet word or a passing touch. Even the Senate steps, when crowded enough, can hide an exchange of glances between debates. Rome's architecture is full of corners, and a noblewoman knows how to use them. It's not all about romance. In many cases, it's about leverage. An affair can cement alliances as effectively as a signed treaty. A whispered promise can secure political backing or ensure a rival's secrets stay buried. In that way, desire becomes another currency in the economy of power, and noble women, often underestimated by outsiders, are some of its most skilled financiers. Of course, not every liaison is calculated. Some are simply about pleasure, the thrill of pursuing and being pursued in a city that feeds on spectacle. Picture a moonlit dinner in a triclinium, torches throwing shadows across frescoed walls, a singer's voice curling into the night air, while two people at the far couch lean just a fraction too close. The meal might be public, but the moment that sliver of charged stillness belongs only to them. And yet this freedom isn't entirely without risk. A jealous rival can turn a whisper into a weapon. A careless word can reach the wrong ear. But the same boldness that lets these women navigate politics also gives them the skill to step neatly around danger or to turn it to their advantage. If a rumor is inevitable, why not shape it into something useful? By the time you leave the courtyard, the noblewomen have moved on, slipping into the shaded mouth of another arcade. They're talking and laughing again, but now their eyes dart toward a pair of men approaching from the opposite side. You can almost see the calculation flicker and vanish, who they are, what they might offer, whether the evening could take a turn. And you realize in Rome, for women of their rank, the city is a chessboard. The rules are elastic, and every glance is a possible opening move. The afternoon heat lies heavy on the forum, yet the hum of conversation never falters. Senators in crisp togas stride past traders' street performers, flick coins into the air, and somewhere between the marble columns, you catch the sight of a very different kind of display. A pair of young men walk together, one older, broad-shouldered, and sun-browned, the other, barely past youth, his tunic bright, and cut a little too well for an apprentice. Their hands don't touch, but the space between them is charged an invisible thread, tugging them in step. In Rome, the idea of who may desire whom is far more flexible than the scripts of later centuries would allow. The poets write openly of male beauty. The satirists tease senators for their taste in young gladiators. Women, too, take lovers of their own sex without the crushing weight of religious condemnation. If there's a fashion that never fades in certain Roman circles, it's the art of same-sex pleasures, a fashion worn as confidently as a laurel crown. For elite men, a relationship with a younger male, often a freedman, a performer, or a youth from a good family, can be as much about prestige as it is about intimacy. To be seen in the company of someone admired for their beauty is a statement, a social accessory like owning a fine villa or being first in line for a senator's invitation. In the baths, this pairing draws glances not of scandal, but of appraisal, as if others are mentally ranking the symmetry of the match. Women's liaisons with each other are spoken of less often in the records, but not because they didn't happen. They simply slid under the radar more easily, woven into the texture of shared spaces, gardens, baths, dining couches, where the line between friendship and something more could be both invisible and deliberate. In certain circles, a woman known for her female companions might even be admired for her independence from the male-dominated marriage market. These relationships could be deeply personal, of course, full of the same jealousies, tenderness, and negotiation as any other pairing. But they could also be public performance, especially when linked to status. A general might keep a favored youth close during games at the amphitheater, letting the crowd see them side by side in the imperial box. A wealthy matron might host a symposium where her closest female friend is seated prominently, the two exchanging glances over wine cups while the men talk politics. The gladiatorial arena is a natural magnet for such attention. Under the midday sun, muscle sweat and blood mingle in a spectacle that draws every kind of admirer. Victorious fighters often find themselves courted not just by women in the stands, but by wealthy men who see in them a blend of danger and beauty. In a culture that venerates physical perfection, the boundaries of desire bend easily to fit whatever shape the moment requires. At the city's festivals, this openness is even more pronounced. During Saturnalia, for example, roles blur, masters and slaves, trading places, gender norms loosened into parody or genuine exploration. A man might dress as a bride and be applauded rather than mocked. A woman might lead a procession with her arm linked through another woman's, the onlookers cheering their bravado. The festival grants permission for what in quieter times is already tolerated but not always flaunted. There are, of course, limits, unspoken lines, more about social order than morality. A citizen man might pursue a male lover, but to be openly penetrated by someone of lower status could invite ridicule. A woman might choose a female partner, but marriage to a man still looms as an expectation, particularly among the upper classes. Rome doesn't condemn the act, it manages the optics. You pass a shaded portico where two men lean against a pillar, one tracing a finger idly along the other's forearm as they talk. A few passers-by glance their way, but most don't bother. This is neither shocking nor particularly rare. What matters is who they are, what their names carry, and how the pairing reflects on their standing. The same scene could play out in a patrician's villa or in the smoky back corner of a tavern, each with its own kind of allure. As you move on, the younger man, from earlier, catches your eye again. His companion has gone ahead, pausing to greet a friend, and for a heartbeat, it's just you and him in the drifting crowd. There's a flicker, not an invitation, not exactly, but an acknowledgement. You've seen it enough now to recognize it, the unhurried, unhidden confidence of a culture that makes room for desire in more than one form. And here in Rome, that room is rarely locked. The sun dips lower, turning the city's white marble a soft gold, and the streets glow as though lit from within. You take a turn down a quieter lane, expecting the usual bakeries and shops, but the walls here seem alive. Not with ivy, but with images painted, carved, and etched into plaster like the city itself can't stop talking about desire. You pause by a small bakery, whose sign at first glance looks like a simple loaf, an amphora. But lean in, and the carved lines twist into something else entirely, a slyly posed couple, hidden in the curl of the bread, the amphora's shape not quite as innocent as it pretends to be. Rome's artisans have perfected the game of slipping the risque into the everyday, daring you to notice. In this city, erotic art isn't a hidden vice, it's a public mural. A lamp on your table, a joke told in pigment and bronze. You wander further, and the scale of it blooms. Entire walls are frescoed with scenes so vivid you can almost hear the laughter, the sighs, the rustle of fabric. Gods and mortals tangled together in bright color. Venus reclining in a way that makes you wonder if she's posing for the viewer or for someone just out of frame. Satyrs chasing nymphs through groves. Where the trees themselves seem to lean closer. In Rome, mythology is less moral tale and more creative excuse. Even the humble oil lamp gets the treatment. At a stall near the baths, you find rows of them lined up for sale, their terracotta surfaces molded into shapes that would scandalize a prudish dinner guest, unless, of course, you're in Rome, where they might be the perfect party favor. The seller doesn't bother lowering his voice as he explains the symbolism to a customer who's clearly enjoying the explanation more than the purchase. Step into a private home, and the art turns from public joke to personal indulgence. One villa's guest room is adorned with a ceiling painting so elaborate it feels like lying beneath a live performance. Another has bronze statuary in the courtyard forms, so polished they catch the evening light, making the skin of the figures seem warm. In the triclinium where guests recline to dine, the walls might depict banquets, where the food is incidental, the true feast happening in the glances and touches between diners. Public buildings aren't immune either. The walls of certain bathhouses and taverns carry graffiti that ranges from witty innuendo to anatomically ambitious sketches. Some of it is personal declarations of affection, boasts about encounters, while other scribbles serve as crude advertisements for local services. These aren't tucked away in corners. They're right where you might lean while waiting for your wine to be poured. You duck into a side street and spot a workshop producing jewelry rings, pendants, amulets, all in shapes that would be unthinkable in more restrained cultures. Some are meant for protection, others for luck, but the craftsmanship ensures there is much conversation pieces as charms. A wealthy matron might wear one, openly its meaning, clear to anyone with the wit to recognize it, daring the room to comment. The most striking part is how normalized it all feels. There's no veil of shame, no warning curtain to pull back. A child might pass a mosaic of lovers on the way to fetch bread. A priest might walk beneath a fresco of entwined figures on his way to the altar. For Rome, the body in all its forms and functions is simply part of the visual language, as familiar as the laurel wreath or the eagle standard. By the time you reach the end of the lane, you realize the city has been quietly instructing you all along. In its markets and homes, in the glow of its lamps and the shadows of its colonnades, Rome tells its citizens and visitors that beauty and desire belong in the open. And as you step back into the busier streets, you notice how your eyes have adjusted. What might once have made you stop and stare now feels like another line in the story Rome is always telling, that to live here is to live unhidden. The sun has slipped below the rooftops now, and the city exhales into evening. The heat lingers in the stones under your feet, but the light has cooled into a deep amber carried in the flames of torches and oil lamps swinging from doorways. You follow the narrow veins of alleyways where the air changes thicker, warmer, laced with perfume roasting meat and something else, a kind of electric expectation. Shadows move ahead, not hurried but deliberate. A man in a dark cloak pauses to murmur, with a woman leaning in a doorway, her hair loose, her tunic slipping from one shoulder. Across the lane, another figure gestures you closer toward a room lit in soft gold, where silhouettes shift against a gauzy curtain. Rome by night doesn't sell you the illusion of mystery. It invites you straight into the heart of it. Here, the voices are lower, the laughter more intimate. Taverns hum, with slower rhythm cups refilled by hands that linger an extra beat. The servers, men and women alike, glide between tables, with trays of wine skewers, of spiced lamb, and glances sharp enough to cut through the smoky air. Sometimes those glances are followed by a quick tilt of the head toward a side door where the night might take a different turn. Not every street is polished. Some are rough, cobbled with uneven stone, the air smelling of rainwater trapped in the gutters. But even here, in the poorer quarters, the creativity of invitation is alive. A girl hums a tune from the shadow of a wall, drawing a man from the main road without ever touching him. A boy leans casually against a tavern post, his grin bright in the torchlight, making passers-by wonder if it's meant for them. Theatrical flourishes appear everywhere. A curtained balcony pulls back to reveal a dancer silhouetted against lamplight, moving with deliberate slowness until the crowd below stops to watch. Down another alley, a woman lets her robe slip in a way that looks accidental, until you notice she's doing it in time with the beat of a drum drifting from the square. This isn't the frenzied chaos of a festival. It's the steady, controlled burn of a city that knows how to stretch desire across the whole night. You find yourself at the edge of an open courtyard, ringed with lanterns. Musicians sit cross-legged on a low platform, coaxing lazy melodies from lyres and flutes. Around them, small groups recline on cushions, sipping from shared cups. The conversation ebbs and flows, sometimes philosophical, sometimes teasing, sometimes dropping into silences that carry their own meaning. From the far side, a woman rises and begins to dance, her feet barely whispering against the stone, her sheer wrap sliding just enough to reveal and then hide again. Every movement says, "I know you're watching," and that's the point. Beyond the courtyard, the streets splinter again, and you wander into a row of private doorways, marked only by subtle signs, a carved figure here, a painted symbol there. These are the thresholds where business and pleasure blur so completely they're impossible to separate. A hand might reach from behind a curtain to pull someone in, or a voice might drift out low and warm, offering something in exchange for nothing more than your time. Even the patrols, the watchmen, with their short swords and round shields, seem more relaxed here, strolling rather than marching. They know this district works like a safety valve for the city. Let people indulge, and they'll return to their daily roles more content, more willing to keep the public face of order intact. As you turn a final corner, the Tiber's dark shimmer catches your eye. Along the embankment, couples sit close on the stone steps, their faces lit by the faint glow of the water. Some talk in hushed tones, others simply lean into each other, the city's noise muted to a distant hum. You pause for a moment, realizing that this is the same Rome as the marble forums and the sunlit gardens, just lit differently, softened, scented, and slowed. And as you walk back into the maze of alleys, torchlight painting the walls and flickers, you understand why the city never truly sleeps. By day, Rome feeds you bread and politics. By night, it offers something far less tangible and far more addictive, the chance to feel for a few hours like the whole world is made of shadows, glances, and doors that are never really locked. Morning in Rome can be as loud and restless as the night before, but this one feels different. The city's voices are thinner, sharper, as if some of the warmth has been pulled away. You notice it first in the forum. Fewer merchants shouting more soldiers at the edges of the crowd, their spears upright and still. The marble steps that once hosted poets' gossip and flirtation now seem like a stage for a different kind of spectacle. At the center of it all stands a raised platform freshly built, its wood darkened from last night's oil lamps. People gather not in anticipation of music or theater, but for a decree, one that will slide across Rome like a cold wind. Christianity has been rising for decades, but now it wears a crown, and the first thing it demands is an end to the city's long, unapologetic embrace of pleasure. The Emperor Theodos is not here in person, but his will arrives in the mouths of officials and the hands of the guard. Male prostitutes, once as accepted as the women of the taverns, are dragged from their familiar corners. Their faces are set, some defiant, others hollowed out as they're herded toward the square where the punishment will be carried out in public. Firewood has been stacked, its dry scent clashing with the tang of metal and sweat. The crowd is restless, but not entirely united. You hear muttered prayers beside snorts of disbelief. Older citizens shake their heads, remembering when the baths echoed with laughter from every kind of pair, when the temples welcomed lovers as easily as they welcomed offerings. Now, The new creed calls for purity, chastity, and the quiet erasure of everything Rome once celebrated. It's not just the brothels that feel the shift. Taverns begin to shutter earlier. Public festivals are trimmed of their more daring performances. The erotic frescoes that line certain porticos are painted over or hidden behind curtains. The baths still steam, but the atmosphere is watchful, stripped of its easy mingling. Even the graffiti, once a patchwork of jokes and boasts, turns tamer or disappears entirely. In private homes, the changes are more subtle, but no less real. Married couples are urged and sometimes forced to confine intimacy to the barest function, producing children. The playful touch, the lingering glance across a dining couch are replaced by a solemn, almost businesslike approach. You hear whispers of a new invention, heavy coarse nightclothes, with a single opening designed to keep skin from touching skin. It's a uniform for duty, not desire. The shift in mood ripples through the city's energy. Without its public embrace of pleasure, Rome feels tighter, more brittle. The marketplaces hum with trade, but the laughter is thinner. The races still roar with excitement, but the after-parties are quieter. The arts bend to new rules, trimming away the edges that once startled or seduced. Of course, not everyone obeys. Behind closed doors, in the corners of villas and the upper rooms of taverns, the old ways survive in miniature. Friends still find each other in the baths after dark. Lovers still slip through gardens at night. But the openness, the unashamed public confidence that made Rome unique, has been replaced by caution. The execution in the square is quick, but not silent. The flames crackle, the crowd murmurs, and somewhere a child asks a question the parent does not answer. You stand back, watching the firelight lick at the edges of a city's memory. This is not the first time Rome has been remade, but it might be the most personal, a rewriting of the body's place in public life. By evening, the platform is empty, the ashes swept into the wind. The square fills again with its usual traffic, but you can feel the shift under the surface. The glances are fewer, the laughter, shorter, the air, a little cooler. And you understand, an empire that once treated desire like bread and wine has been told to treat it like a sin. Rome's nights will go on, but they will never glow quite the same way again. You wake to a Rome that feels strangely hollow, as if the marble streets have been swept clean of something more than dust. The forums still bustle. The markets still ring with the clatter of coin. But the city's pulse, that low, steady thrum of indulgence, is quieter now. You can sense it in the way people avoid certain topics, in the faint hesitation before laughter spills too loudly in a public place. It would be easy to blame the change entirely on religion, on the sudden command that desire be hidden away. But as you walk, you begin to notice something else, woven into the silence, a creeping absence of children's voices. The side streets, once alive with games and shouts, seem emptier. Couples pass you hand in hand, but fewer carry the bundled weight of an infant or are trailed by a gaggle of toddlers. Rome's obsession with pleasure has always been obvious, but now its neglect of the quieter duty of reproduction is impossible to ignore. For generations, citizens have prized the moment over the legacy. Marriages, especially among the wealthy, are as much about property and alliances as about raising the next generation. Affairs and indulgences take precedence over large families. Intimacy becomes an art form meant to delight, not to create. In the villas of the elite heirs are fewer and further between, and the constant supply of slaves and foreigners fills gaps in the labor force, but does little to grow the citizen ranks. the military feels it most acutely. Legion recruiters grumble about dwindling numbers of fit young men, their voices low, but their worry deep. An army that once seemed inexhaustible now scrapes the edges of its provinces for soldiers relying more on mercenaries, men loyal to coin, rather than Rome itself. The once proud discipline of the legions begins to fray, not in a dramatic collapse, but in the slow, grinding way a rope wears thin. In the taverns, older men mutter about the past, about the days when the streets were fuller, when the city's laughter came from both lovers and the shouts of children chasing hoops through the alleys. Younger patrons roll their eyes, but there's a restlessness there too, a sense that something has shifted beyond their control. Pleasure is still here, still sought, but without the balance of renewal, it begins to feel more like an echo than a song. Even the architecture bears silent witness. Grand bathhouses still stand, but their pools are less crowded. The great stadiums still host games, but the roar of the crowd seems to reach just a little less high. Villas once bursting with feasts and entertainments hold smaller gatherings, now their hosts choosing intimacy over spectacle. What was once a confident display of abundance now feels like a culture guarding the remnants of its own vitality. As you wander past the Tiber in the late afternoon, you find yourself remembering the Rome you first stepped into, the steam-filled baths, the riotous festivals, the easy mingling of desire and daily life. It's not gone entirely. You still catch glimpses in a daring glance across a market stall, in a whispered joke between friends, in the quiet confidence of someone who remembers how it used to be. But those moments are islands now, not the tide. The irony is sharp. The empire that once seemed invincible in its appetite for conquest, for beauty, for pleasure, is being hollowed from within, not by the weight of its indulgence alone, but by the absence of what indulgence forgot to protect. Rome's enemies will batter its borders, its politics will fracture. But long before the last standard falls, the city's spirit will have been dimmed by a simple human arithmetic: fewer hands to build fewer voices, to shout fewer hearts to carry it forward. By nightfall, the streets glow again with torchlight shadows dancing across the same walls that once bore frescoes of lovers and banquets. The wine still flows, music still drifts from courtyards, and the air still carries the promise of stolen moments. But beneath it all, you feel the weight of what's missing, not just in the hush between songs, but in the very bones of the city. And as you turn away, you can't help but wonder if Rome's greatest pleasure was also in the end its most dangerous indulgence, believing the feast could last forever. You've walked through the streets, baths, and festivals of Rome, tracing the city's fearless dance with desire. But if the daily life of its citizens felt shocking, the private worlds of its emperors were another realm entirely, a stage where power, paranoia, and pleasure collided in ways both decadent and disturbing. These were not merely men in togas. They were living gods in the eyes of their subjects, answerable to no one, free to indulge whims that could reshape a court overnight. In their palaces, the rules bent, broke, and vanished, replaced by elaborate games of seduction, humiliation, and excess. Step beyond the marble gates now, and you'll see how the empire's most powerful men turned intimacy into theater, and often into madness. Imagine walking into a palace where the ruler treats his guests like unwilling actors in a play they never auditioned for. That's Caligula for you, the emperor whose reputation for excess still manages to outshine most tyrants in history. The man didn't just host banquets. He staged performances where food conversation, and even the people themselves became props in a theater of dominance. You picture a massive hall draped with silver trays groaning with roasted peacocks and honey-drenched dormice, and at the head of it all, Caligula smirking eyes, darting like he's waiting for the next chance to shock. Would you feel honored to sit at that table, or would you quietly pray to slip out the back door before dessert? Caligula, born Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, stepped onto the stage of Rome's imperial throne in 37 CE after the death of Tiberius. At first, he was adored the young prince, raised in the shadow of Augustus's legacy. But almost overnight, the charm twisted into cruelty, and cruelty into spectacle. Roman historians like Suetonius describe banquets where Caligula demanded silence only to break it himself with laughter when he ordered senators' wives to join him mid-meal in his chambers before returning them to their seats as if nothing happened. Whether every detail is literal truth or embellished rumor hardly matters. What mattered was the impression he left no one at that table was safe from becoming his entertainment. The very way he treated food revealed his need to dominate. Ancient writers tell us he would serve bread made of gold leaf, not because anyone could eat it, but because he wanted to remind guests that wealth meant nothing in his hands. If he could waste gold on a snack, what did your fortunes mean next to his? Think about it. When someone today buys a diamond-encrusted phone case, part of the point isn't function, but shock value. Caligula pioneered that mindset nearly 2,000 years earlier, flaunting absurdity as proof of power. And it wasn't just the guests who felt trapped in this theater. The empire itself became a stage. Caligula reportedly dressed up as gods Mercury, Apollo, even Venus, and strutted around demanding worship. To the Romans, gods were serious business woven into civic life, and here was their emperor blurring the line between mortal ruler and divine parody. At one point, he even set up a temple with a golden statue of himself, priests, and sacrifices all to his own honor. Picture attending Sunday service, only to find your local mayor demanding hymns sung to him. It's a mix of absurdity and menace that defined Caligula's reign. The anecdotes grow stranger the deeper you walk into his palace halls. Ancient sources claim he built a temporary bridge of boats across the Bay of Baiae, simply so he could ride his horse across the water, mocking a prophecy that said he had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding across that bay. Thousands of soldiers had to line the boats together just for his private joke. Imagine the expense, the sweat, the sheer ridiculousness of watching an emperor giggle as his horse clip-clopped over the sea. It was humor, sharpened into humiliation, for everyone forced to cheer. Then there's the story of his favorite horse, Incitatus. Caligula lavished on the animal a marble-stable ivory manger, purple blankets, and servants. He even hinted at making the horse a consul, the highest elected office in Rome. Scholars debate whether this was serious or satire, but either way, it sent the same message if he could elevate a horse above Rome's elite. What did that make the senators at his table? You might chuckle. But if you were a senator watching your career undone by a stallion, the joke suddenly had teeth. The darker edge of his banquets revealed itself in sudden mood swings. Ancient accounts mention Caligula bursting into fits of rage mid-feast, ordering executions or beatings on the spot. The randomness was the point. He thrived on the fear that no one could predict what came next. One day, he gave money to guests. The next, he confiscated fortunes, always keeping the court dancing on a knife's edge. It's the kind of behavior that makes modern office holiday parties awkward as they can be looked tame. At least your boss probably isn't threatening to toss you off a balcony between courses. Of course, some historians caution us, Suetonius and Cassius Dio wrote decades after Caligula's death, and they had every reason to paint him in monstrous colors. Rome loved its cautionary tales, and Caligula became the perfect villain. Yet the consistency of these stories across sources suggests at least a kernel of truth. Even if every scandalous detail wasn't literal, the man clearly delighted in breaking Rome's social and moral codes. His short reign of barely 4 years left a mark so deep that his name still echoes as shorthand for lunatic tyranny. The irony, Caligula didn't just shock Rome, he made shock his form of governance. By unsettling the senators, the generals, even his own family, he ensured no one could ever relax enough to plot against him. Paranoia became policy, and entertainment became oppression. And though it eventually led to his assassination in 41 CE for a while, it worked. You almost have to admire the twisted genius. What better way to keep control than by making your audience too terrified to leave the theater? You wander from the echo of Caligula's theatrics into the shimmering glow of Nero's domus, Aurea the Golden House, a palace so enormous and bizarre that even Rome's citizens, who were no strangers to spectacle, gasped in disbelief. Picture walking into a villa with ceilings studded in gemstones, walls dripping with gold leaf, and a dining room whose roof actually rotated to imitate the heavens. Suetonius tells us Nero designed it, so flowers could rain down on guests mid-meal, and perfume could be sprayed from hidden nozzles. It wasn't a house at all. It was a performance, and you were part of the act, whether you liked it or not. Nero's reign, 54-68 CE, often feels like a fever dream of power and art colliding. Unlike Caligula, whose cruelty dominated, Nero leaned into theater music and fantasy. He wasn't content to be emperor. He wanted to be star playwright and rock idol rolled into one. You can almost hear the groan of senators forced to applaud when Nero took the stage to sing "Forbidden to Leave" until he was finished. One story claims some spectators pretended to faint just to be carried out, desperate for relief from his endless recitals. Imagine being trapped at karaoke night, where the performer is not only tone deaf, but also happens to control the army and the treasury. But Nero didn't just manipulate the stage, he manipulated identity itself. Ancient accounts describe how he blurred marriage and gender roles in ways that scandalized Roman society. In one infamous episode, Nero publicly married a young freedman named Pythagoras with himself in the role of bride. The Roman elite, steeped in rigid traditions of masculinity, nearly choked on their wine at the thought of their emperor in bridal attire. Later, Nero repeated the performance with Sporus, a boy he reportedly had castrated, then dressed as an empress, and paraded through Rome as his consort. Whether these stories were exaggerated or not, the symbolism was loud. Nero would not be confined by Rome's rules. He would rewrite them in gold silk and shock. The citizens themselves were caught between fascination and fury. On one hand, there's no denying Nero gave Rome entertainment games, show spectacles that dazzled even his critics. On the other hand, he drained the treasury to fund his fantasies, raised taxes, and allegedly executed rivals in gruesome displays. The paradox is almost modern, like a celebrity whose scandals keep them in headlines. Nero thrived on outrage. And when you think about it, isn't it a little familiar? Leaders today might not marry their favorite performers in the Colosseum, but how often do we see politics drift into theater? Staged photo ops, choreographed speeches, shock designed to grab attention. And then, of course, came the Great Fire of 64 CE. Flames raged for days, consuming entire districts of the city. Rumors spread that Nero had ordered the fire to clear land for his new palace, though historians still debate this. Tacitus writes that while Rome burned, Nero was said to have sung of the fall of Troy, comparing himself to heroic figures. The truth may never be fully known, but what matters is the image that stuck Nero as the emperor who watched his city die while his fantasies bloomed. Out of the ashes rose the Domus Aurea, covering more than 100 acres of central Rome, a palace so outrageous it was less a home than a declaration of untouchable power. Walking through its ruins today, you can still see traces of that golden obsession. Frescoes, painted in brilliant reds and blues, intricate mosaics, and massive vaulted chambers remind you that this was no ordinary dwelling. The emperor wanted his guests to feel dwarfed, dazzled, and ultimately powerless in the presence of his vision. Even centuries later, Renaissance artists, crawling through its collapsed halls, found themselves stunned by its scale and beauty, carrying its influence into their own work. Nero's fantasy lived on even as his body did not. Of course, Rome eventually turned on him. His endless shows, his bizarre marriages, his financial drains combined with military revolts drove him to suicide in 68 CE. His last words, according to legend, were, "What an artist dies in me." And that about sums him up. Nero never saw himself as a mere ruler. He saw himself as performance incarnate an artist for whom an empire was both stage and audience. And maybe that's why his legacy remains so magnetic. Caligula shocked through cruelty, but Nero shocked through artifice rearranging reality until everyone around him felt trapped in his script. Whether you admire the creativity or recoil from the indulgence, the Golden House still whispers his dream that Rome itself could become a theater and the emperor its eternal star. You leave behind the glitter of Nero's golden palace and climb the rugged cliffs of Capri, where the sea wind is sharp and the rocks plunge down into endless blue. Here, Tiberius, the emperor, who reigned before Caligula, retreated from Rome's bustle in his later years. To outsiders, it might have looked like a quiet retirement, but the whispers that followed him across the empire painted a far darker picture. Capri became less a peaceful villa and more a fortress of secrets, where the emperor's appetites, real or exaggerated, fed the imagination of every Roman gossip monger. Tiberius had never been the most beloved ruler. Adopted by Augustus, he carried the burden of an empire he didn't particularly enjoy ruling. Tacitus describes him as cautious, even brooding, and always more comfortable in military camps than in the Senate. But once he withdrew to Capri, around 26 CE, the rumors started to snowball. With Rome hundreds of miles away, the emperor's image became whatever people wanted to make of it. Senators claimed he surrounded himself with astrologers, sycophants, and a circle of young companions, and soon the tale spiraled into scandal. One famous source of rumor was Suetonius, who accused Tiberius of unspeakable behavior at his cliffside villas, details so lurid that later historians have often wondered how much was truth and how much was slander. Rome had a long tradition of tearing down rulers' reputations after their deaths, especially emperors who fell out of favor with the Senate. And Tiberius, with his grim demeanor and withdrawal from the capital, made the perfect target. Still, the image stuck Capri as a kind of imperial pleasure island, a place where the emperor indulged unchecked. From a practical point of view, Capri made sense. The island was defensible with sheer cliffs protecting against invasion and only a handful of landing spots for ships. If you were paranoid about assassins or uprisings, what better place to watch your back than a rocky perch surrounded by water? But to the Roman people, the emperor's absence looked like abandonment. Imagine your country's leader suddenly deciding to run the nation from a remote beach resort, rarely appearing in public, leaving bureaucrats and guards to deliver orders in his name. You'd start to wonder what he was really doing there, and gossip then, as now, filled the silence. The whispers grew louder. With every year Tiberius stayed away. They said he let Sejanus, commander of the Praetorian Guard, run Rome like a shadow emperor, until Sejanus was abruptly executed for treason. They said Tiberius spent his days in constant fear, punishing senators for imagined plots, creating a climate where no one felt safe. And layered on top of the political fear were the personal scandals, the stories of decadent banquets, manipulations, and excess. Whether exaggerated or not, the fact that people believed them shows how far Tiberius's image had drifted from Augustus's vision of a dignified moral princeps. If you pause here, you notice a pattern forming among these rulers. Isolation breeds distortion. The less people saw of Tiberius, the wilder the stories became. By the time of his death in 37 CE, he was remembered not for his early military successes or cautious governance, but for the island fortress of Capri wrapped in rumor. Even the manner of his death turned into a grim tale. One version claims he recovered from a collapse just as the Senate prepared to announce his passing, and that he was smothered with a pillow to make the announcement stick. Whether true or not, it fit the narrative Rome had already written. The emperor, who had hidden away in fear and secrecy, met an ending as murky as his reputation. Standing on the cliffs today, you see both sides of the story. The view is breathtaking, the sea stretching forever, the villas still perched proudly on the heights. To one eye, Capri was a strategic retreat, the sanctuary of an aging ruler worn down by politics. To another, it was the symbol of an emperor lost in paranoia and whispers of indulgence. And maybe the real truth lies in between Tiberius as a man who preferred control from a distance, only to discover that distance breeds the kind of stories that outlive fact. The Colosseum roars, the sand churns with blood. In the middle of it all sits Commodus, the emperor, who decided being ruler of Rome wasn't enough. He also wanted to be its star gladiator. Hooked on spectacle, like a modern celebrity addicted to the spotlight, Commodus blurred the line between imperial dignity and vulgar entertainment. You picture him striding into the arena, muscles gleaming a lion's skin draped over his shoulders, holding a club as if he were Hercules reborn. This wasn't a ruler content to watch from the imperial box. This was a man who demanded applause as fighter, performer, and emperor all at once. Commodus, son of Marcus Aurelius, inherited the throne in 180 CE. His father had been the philosopher emperor, praised for his wisdom and his stoic calm. And then came Commodus, who took all that gravitas and turned it upside down. Where Marcus wrote meditations on virtue, Commodus wrote himself into the arena's program. He fought not against trained gladiators, heaven forbid he risk losing, but against wounded men criminals and exotic animals brought in from across the empire. Ancient sources claim he once killed 100 lions in a single day, armed safely from above the arena floor. It wasn't skill he wanted to prove, it was spectacle. And Rome, at least, at first, gave him that applause. The people loved bread and circuses, and Commodus delivered them in spades. Who wouldn't cheer when the emperor himself stepped down into the ring? But beneath the noise, senators and nobles seethed. To them, it wasn't entertainment. It was humiliation. The dignity of Rome's highest office was being dragged into the sand caked with sweat and animal blood. Imagine if a head of state today suddenly joined professional wrestling, full-time, not as a publicity stunt, but as their main identity. That was Commodus' absurd and magnetic in equal measure. His obsession with Hercules made it even stranger. Commodus had statues erected of himself in the Heroes Garb Club lion skin, the whole costume, insisting that he wasn't just an emperor, but a living god. Coins minted during his reign show him as Hercules, Romanus, muscles bulging, divine protector of the world. To the people, it might have been thrilling. To the Senate, it was terrifying. He wasn't just claiming political power. He was claiming mythological supremacy. When a ruler starts confusing themselves with gods, history usually takes a dark turn. The sexual undertones of Commodus's shows didn't go unnoticed either. Ancient writers describe him surrounding himself with favorites, men and women alike, who indulged his whims. In the arena, dominance and desire often blurred with power, plays that doubled as performance. Roman historians may have exaggerated the lurid details, but the symbolism was clear. Commodus treated both intimacy and violence as theater, something to flaunt before a roaring crowd. The empire was no longer a state to govern. It was an audience to please. And yet, for all the extravagance, paranoia crept in. Commodus's reign became a carousel of conspiracies, executions, and betrayals. He trusted few, punished many, and retreated further into his fantasy of godhood. The Senate eventually declared him a public enemy, and his inner circle plotted his assassination. In 192 CE, a wrestler named Narcissus strangled him in his bath, a bitter irony for a man who had built his image on physical strength. The people who once cheered him in the arena soon watched his statues pulled down, his memory cursed by decree. Looking back, you can almost sense why Rome both loved and despised him. To the masses, Commodus was entertainment, incarnate a ruler, who gave them the thrill of seeing their emperor bleed the same sand as gladiators. To the elites, he was a nightmare, erasing centuries of tradition in the name of applause. His twisted legacy wasn't just about indulgence. It was about the dangers of spectacle as politics. When the line between ruler and performer disappears, governance becomes theater, and the audience becomes trapped in someone else's play. The roar of the Colosseum fades, and in its place, you hear the clash of cymbals, the pounding of drums, and the gasp of Roman crowds watching something they had never seen before. Down the avenue sweeps Elagabalus Emperor from 218 to 222 CE, clad not in armor, but in silken robes, trailing perfumes so strong that even the statues seemed to reek of them. Where Commodus had tried to be Hercules, Elagabalus decided to be something even more disruptive, high priest goddess, and scandal embodied in one fragile figure. Born Varius Avitus Bassianus in Syria, Elagabalus came to power as a teenager, thrust onto the throne by the ambitions of his family. His connection to the cult of the sun, god Elagabal, gave him his later name, and he seemed determined to transplant that Eastern devotion straight into Rome's marble heart. Imagine the confusion of senators as the emperor announced that their traditional gods, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, were to kneel before his Syrian deity. He built a grand temple, dragged the sacred black stone of his god into the city, and forced Rome's proudest men to join him in bizarre new rituals. For an empire obsessed with tradition, this was blasphemy disguised as pageantry. But it wasn't only religion that Elagabalus upended. Ancient sources describe him openly defying Roman gender norms. Cassius Dio and Herodian tell us he dressed in women's clothing, insisted on being called lady rather than lord, and even sought surgical procedures that would alter his body. Was this truth exaggeration or malicious gossip? Hard to say. But what matters is the image that survived an emperor who dismantled the rigid Roman definition of masculinity and power. You can imagine the Senate's collective pearl clutching as their teenage emperor floated into court in jeweled tiaras. The emperor's private life became legend again, some details blurred by hostile writers, but the pattern remains clear. He reportedly married multiple times, including to a Vestal virgin, a shocking breach of sacred law. He was said to throw lavish banquets where the food itself became a performance, dishes laced with gold flakes, couches sinking under the weight of purple silk, guests showered with petals until they could hardly breathe. One story claims he released hundreds of exotic animals into banquet halls just for the surprise of it. Whether or not every anecdote is literally true, they reveal how contemporaries saw him not as a ruler, but as chaos in jeweled sandals. And yet beneath the scandal, there's almost a strange modern echo. Elagabalus rejected the roles Rome forced upon him, insisting on living as he pleased. You might shake your head at the extremes, marrying 4 times before the age of 20, ordering senators to worship a foreign sun god, but in his own twisted way, he defied the rigid labels of his world. If Commodus blurred the line between emperor and gladiator, Elagabalus blurred the very categories of gender and divine authority. But Rome was not ready for this kind of experiment. The Praetorian Guard, exhausted by his unpredictability, eventually turned on him. In 222 CE, at only 18 years old, Elagabalus was assassinated along with his mother, their bodies dragged through the streets before being dumped into the Tiber. The Senate wasted no time erasing his name, tearing down his monuments, and restoring the old gods to their pedestals. His 4-year reign was remembered as a nightmare part, theater part, scandal part, spiritual rebellion. Standing in the aftermath, you can almost picture the senators exhaling with relief, convinced they had purged Rome of a dangerous anomaly. But the memory of Elagabalus lingered, whispered in taverns, and scrawled in histories. The boy emperor who broke every rule, the ruler who tried to rebuild Rome in silk and incense, and the figure whose defiance was so outrageous that even centuries later, his name still feels like a jolt of electricity. The jeweled chaos of Elagabalus drifts away, and now you find yourself in the quieter but no less scandalous chambers of Claudius and his notorious wife Messalina. Claudius, the unexpected emperor, was known for his limp, his stammer, and the way many senators initially dismissed him as a harmless bookworm. But history quickly discovered that the palace was not only a place of dusty scholarship, it was also the stage for one of the most infamous imperial marriages in Roman memory. Claudius came to the throne in 41 CE, after the assassination of Caligula. No one had expected him to rule. In fact, the Praetorian Guard supposedly discovered him hiding behind a curtain, half terrified, half bewildered, and hailed him as emperor on the spot. Despite these unpromising beginnings, he turned out to be intelligent and pragmatic, expanding the empire into Britain and reforming administration. Yet his private life, dominated by Messalina, quickly overshadowed his policies. Valeria Messalina was young, ambitious, and infamous for her insatiable appetite for intrigue. Ancient historians paint her as the embodiment of excess. Suetonius and Tacitus accuse her of manipulating court politics, eliminating rivals, and indulging in affairs so numerous that they became palace gossip. One story, perhaps more legend than fact, claims she once entered a contest with a leading courtesan to see who could entertain more partners in a single day and won. Whether true or not, the anecdote illustrates how Rome viewed her as a symbol of unchecked desire within the walls of imperial power. Messalina's marriage to Claudius became a paradox. Outwardly, she was empress wife and mother to his children. Inwardly, she seemed to mock the very institution she embodied. Roman sources suggest she wielded influence like a weapon, orchestrating political purges against anyone who threatened her position. Senators lived in fear of her whispered accusations. Yet Claudius, buried in paperwork and scholarship, often seemed oblivious, or at least willfully blind. How do you explain this? Was he genuinely unaware? Or did he simply prefer not to confront the storm under his own roof? The scandal reached its climax with Messalina's so-called marriage to her lover, Gaius Silius, while Claudius was away. According to Tacitus, it wasn't a secret affair in some shadowed chamber, but a full-blown ceremony, complete with witnesses' vows and a public sense of finality, as if she were already done with the emperor. For Romans, this was beyond shocking. It was political suicide. It suggested not just infidelity, but a plot to overthrow Claudius himself. When word reached him, Claudius's advisors convinced him to act, and Messalina was executed before he even saw her again. If you pause for a moment, you can see why this story has clung so tightly to her name. Messalina became shorthand in later centuries for female betrayal and lust unchecked by restraint. Writers, poets, even operas invoke her name as a warning tale. And yet, like so many imperial scandals, you wonder how much of it was truth and how much was political smear. After all, it was in the Senate's interest to vilify the woman they had helped eliminate. Claudius himself carried on later, marrying Agrippina the Younger, who in her own way would prove equally formidable. But Messalina's legacy remained. To the people of Rome, the palace had shown itself again, not as a sanctuary of virtue, but as a stage where marriage power and desire collided in dangerous ways. Her story isn't just about betrayal. It's about how private appetites can reshape the fate of an empire. Step softly now, because the marble corridors around you feel alive with suspicion, and the silence is heavier than stone. The most frightening emperor isn't always the one who shouts from balconies. It's the one who smiles faintly, whispers in shadows, and keeps everyone guessing whether their loyalty will be rewarded or destroyed. That was Domitian, who ruled Rome from 81 to 96 CE, a man who wrapped his reign in secrecy, paranoia, and cruelties dressed as love. Domitian had come to power after the death of his brother Titus, the beloved emperor, who gave Rome the Colosseum and a brief sense of stability. Titus was mourned. Domitian was feared. He never trusted the Senate, and they never trusted him. To tighten his grip, he filled his palace with informers, rewarding those who uncovered plots and crushing anyone suspected of betrayal. Soon even laughter felt dangerous because a careless joke could be twisted into treason. The court lived in a kind of permanent stage play of fear, where every line was rehearsed, every smile forced, and every silence pregnant with danger. The rumors about his private life mirrored the climate of suspicion. Suetonius writes that Domitian was deeply jealous of his wife, Domitia Longina, at one point banishing her for suspected affairs only to recall her later unable to endure separation. His affections seemed genuine at times, but they were barbed with control. Love in his palace was less a tender bond than a form of possession proof that even intimacy became political under his gaze. You can almost picture him at dinner, eyes never leaving her, while senators squirmed, wondering whether their own marriages might soon be dragged into the emperor's theater of suspicion. The paradox ran deeper still. Domitian demanded to be addressed as Dominus et Deus Lord and God an honorific that infuriated Rome's senators, but left them powerless to resist. Publicly, he styled himself as moral reformer, punishing corrupt practices and even condemning Vestal virgins who broke their vows. Privately, though, rumors swirled of hidden chambers and indulgences, pleasures that contradicted the morality he claimed to guard. It's the kind of hypocrisy history has seen time and again leaders who thunder against vice by day only to taste it themselves by night. Fear was his sharpest weapon. Treason trials multiplied. Noble families saw their wealth confiscated overnight. One senator might be praised in the morning, executed by evening. Those who sat near him never knew whether